And we've got plenty on the agenda. Paul sent around a packet this week, so hopefully we've got all the materials. Paul, I think once again you're on your own there, so everyone is on their own for emergency exits. And I guess we'll start out then with the agenda. Any additions, deletions, changes, questions?
I have a question. I just sent Paul a question in the chat. I'm not sure that he received it, but I just wanted to ask, can we talk about the items in the memo sent from CCRPC staff before we dive into the sector discussion?
Okay.
That seems reasonable. I'll have to make sure I've got, I'll dig mine up, make sure I've got it. Okay, so we'll add that before the sector stuff. Any other questions, requests? How about anyone from the public with an item not on the agenda they want to bring to our attention? Keith.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Epstein with the South Burlington Energy Committee. And I've been on the Energy Committee since it started in 2008. And this is so exciting that you guys are working on this. It's something that we've wanted for a long time. And I think it's fantastic that City Council approved it and that you all volunteered and that you're making progress. It's really such a good thing for South Burlington. So start by saying thank you very much. And then also I wanted to offer support from the Energy Committee in terms of public outreach. I think it's really important to engage with the public during the process of developing the climate action plan, not waiting until you've got a draft to share, but just, I think that also needs to be done, but I think it's important to get some open-ended feedback. Make sure that people know that this is going on and that they have an easy way to participate, whether they agree with what's going on or whether they don't agree. I think it's important because when people look back and say, this climate action plan was developed, if they didn't even know that it was happening, they won't feel any ownership. Whereas if they know they had the opportunity to comment and they did, or they knew that they had the opportunity and then they decided not to, that says, well, I saw the opportunity, I didn't decide to participate. I guess I just have to accept what they developed. So I wanted to share that thought and also offer Energy Committee resources to help with the public outreach. We've done a lot, and I can either give you some suggestions of various ways to reach people, or we can work together and like if somebody wanted to write an article for the other paper or a series of articles, we could help proof it and get it published. We can publish things on our Facebook page, Front Porch Forum. The city has a newsletter. Yesterday, I just started putting together a list, like organizations like the Land Trust, like Rotary, all of the other city volunteer committees. I feel like we should make an effort to make sure they know about it and give them the opportunity to participate.
Go lie down.
Paul? You're muted. Okay, you're not muted, but we're not getting your audio.
How about now?
Perfect.
Yep.
We can hear you.
All right. First of all, Keith, thank you very much, and we will absolutely take advantage of that. Secondly, just a little FYI for everybody that we have been working diligently with the city manager's office on a strategy for communicating in a consistent manner for all of the major things happening this year, the climate action plan, the council's request to have feedback on how to use ARPA funds, leading into the city's comprehensive plan, so that we are coming across as a coordinated entity that is creating predictable ways for the public to engage with us. We're really excited about it. And Keith, I think a big piece of this is taking advantage of all these amazing networks that you've created links to. So stay tuned in the very, very, very near future.
Okay, excellent.
Great. Yeah, Helen.
I just wanted to piggyback on Keith's. I had a wonderful several-hour conversation with a younger woman in South Burlington who was really anxious to and identified the real need, particularly, and this morphed into the climate task force, but involving the youth early on with all of the things that we're trying to accomplish. Because in her opinion, they're the ones that are really going to have to do the work. And, you know, we often have them, I know, come into city council and they're very eloquent and they share their thoughts, and then they go away and we haven't figured out how to engage them. So that's another group of people, whether we do it through the schools or, I don't know, PWAC classes or whatever it is. But I think I appreciated her comment about it's really the kids who are I'm gonna be dead before half of this stuff gets done, you know? So it's our children. It's their legacy and they need to be engaged so that we hear them and find out what they're interested in.
Yeah, great point, Helen. Paul, since it sounds like you've been starting to lay the groundwork for some of the outreach partnerships that could happen, do you already have some partners that are well positioned to reach? And I'm not sure exactly how we're defining this, right? We've talked about, you know, school age, but Helen, it sort of sounded like this might be someone who was out of school. I mean, I think there's a whole range in there, right? Do you have someone like that lined up, Paul, or is that something you could use help with making a connection?
We have some areas where we're strong and some areas where we're weak. I would say that areas of, you know, post high school, pre sort of being fully established in the community and taking advantage of rec programs is one of those gaps. Also, you know, traditionally underserved populations are, you know, and all the definitions of that are, we don't always have great links. You know, we've got good connections to the senior population, but not necessarily to new or recent American populations. So we've got some areas of strength and some areas of weakness. So yes, absolutely, we'd love to get some help on how to connect to some of those groups, not just for this project, but across the board.
Great.
And also, can I say
Certainly.
something? I was going to bring this up tonight when we talk about the equity and the scoring, because that's on the agenda for tonight, but it also dovetails with what Keith was saying, because that scorecard for judging how the plans that you have meet equity and is very explicit in saying, are these populations involved in the beginning of the planning process, not once you've got a bunch of things you want to do and then you hand it to them and say, hey, how's this? So we haven't really had a chance to do that. I think we've been pretty overwhelmed with these two giant sector pathways, but we really need to think about that. And Keith, I thank you very much for being here and stating that explicitly as well.
Great. Thanks, Sterling. Michael, did you have your hand up? We can't hear you.
There we go.
Yes.
Yes, I was going to ask, are we not going to discuss public engagement when we get to going through the schedule, which is the last table in tonight's package? Because that's where I had some questions. And if we're going to get there, then I'll leave it for then.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, because it is on the agenda. I think, we were taking some comments from the public, but to the extent that the whole task force wants to weigh in, maybe we should pick it up at that point. Any other comments from members of the public who are here about either that topic or others?
Well, one potential way for the outreach to the public would be through the city's food truck events in the summer. Does anybody know when those start?
No.
The Thursday night?
Typically they're July and August, Keith, so
That's pretty late.
We'll keep that on our radar, though, as certainly one of the ways.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's all I had. Thanks.
Steve, do you have something?
Yeah, thanks. Oh, I just want to say I'm with Keith, part of the Energy Committee, and very interested in finding ways to reach out to people in different sectors, especially the ones that are hard to reach. They're always hard to reach, and we're I don't know anybody that's very good at that. I know a lot of people have talked about it, and so I guess I would say sort of emphasize the point that Keith made, that maybe there are two separate processes. One is the early ongoing and really ongoing, not something that just ends, but something that could start early and informally, but then there's another process that is probably more formal that the task force needs to accomplish too, and they're both important, but they sort of operate in different ways and accomplish different ends to some degree. And I would say that it's not too soon to start figuring out how to go forward with that. So I'm, along with Keith, and I know Marcy's been coming to a bunch of these, and she's also on our committee, and it would be, great. We're really happy to add our energy to the mix here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the offer, Steve. I really like the point about thinking about engagement mechanisms that are not just a single point of contact, but that can be the first in an ongoing process. So we can hopefully bring that back up at the longer discussion. And I think since we're seeing all the support from the Energy Committee offered, that we should definitely cover, in that topic, like what the best way is to collaborate with the Energy Committee and take advantage of this offer. So thanks to both of you. Okay, so we'll follow up on that conversation then at the later section of the agenda. Any other comments, or should we continue on to Melanie's item?
Yeah.
All right. Great, Melanie, take it away. And you mentioned, if you can queue up for us, you mentioned something that was sent out. I tried to find in my email just now to see if I could bring it up, and I'm not finding it, so maybe I'm not searching the right way, but
I can share my screen.
great.
Are you seeing it?
Not yet. Now, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this was the memo that was sent out with the packet. The purpose of the memo, actually, there's a lot of purposes of the memo, but first off, it's the memo is intended to outline the remaining tasks needed to complete the plan so we can stay on schedule and budget. We still have a lot of work to do. We've gotten significant progress on the buildings and thermal sector, the transportation and land use sector, and then moving forward, going into government operations, agriculture, natural areas, solid waste, renewable energy generation, and climate action. So or climate adaptation. So we have other sectors that we need to consider. The schedule talks about when that's going to happen. We already started talking about equity. It's really important to remind ourselves that the charter for this task force states that the climate action plan should have a commitment to principles of equity and inclusion. So just wanted to remind the task force that we'll be relying on the Vermont Climate Council's guiding principles for a just transition. And we'll be using the scoring criteria in this tool to identify whether an action is low, medium, or high on the equity spectrum. If it's low or medium, we would add another discussion or narrative to identify how to improve the equity considerations of that action to further explore in the implementation plan. Also, another aspect of our work is greenhouse gas emissions inventory for 2019 base year. At the last meeting, initially we talked about 2020, but then realized that the VMT for 2020 is going to include a lot of remote working and working from home, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but doesn't necessarily give us a good picture of existing conditions and kind of where we were starting from prior to the pandemic. So I talked with transportation planners at CCRPC, and they agreed that 2019 is a good base year to start from. So the hope is that at our next meeting on April 27th, we will look at some draft or updated, further customized for South Burlington science-based targets. And then also we already started a good conversation about public engagement. So thank you, Keith, and other members of the Energy Committee for your offer. The idea is for the city to lead that effort with CCRPC support. We've already reached out to organizations that represent impacted communities, one of which is Cathedral Square. And they were willing to help spread the word about this work to reach seniors in South Burlington. So I think that's some good progress there. Also wanted to discuss the final deliverable product and kind of what the expectations are within the scope. The task force has often referred to the Montgomery County plan as a model for this work, which I think is excellent. I really appreciate having a model to work from and a target to look towards in terms of the final deliverable product. The Montgomery plan is very large, and also the climate action planning process that the city has conceptualized here is divided into two plans, both the principal plan and the implementation plan. So Ann and I had taken a look at the Montgomery plan and felt that when you get into the sector sections of the Montgomery plan, there was it seemed like there was a very clear divide of what would be in the principal plan and what would be in the implementation plan. So I just wanted to quickly share that with you all to make sure that we're kind of on the same page. So for example, this is the transportation sector part of that Montgomery plan. There's kind of an overview of the targets and associated data on this front page. And then there's a lengthy narrative about the transportation sector. And then there is a list of the actions in the transportation sector. So the thinking is that these first 3 pages would make up the principal plan for each sector for South Burlington's climate action plan. And then going into the implementation plan where there's a larger discussion about individual actions that would be parked in the implementation plan process. So I just wanted to kind of get a read from the task force on whether you guys agree with that, because as I mentioned, the schedule is compressed and we want to stay on time and on budget. So I guess if people like that idea, maybe you can use your Zoom thumbs and say thumbs up. Seems like we're getting some agreement. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Ethan's 5. Great. Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page as that. Okay. I'm just going to
We'll
put
just
the
check. Do we have
memo.
any?
Oh,
I know Bill has his camera off. And Bill, I didn't see if you had given a Zoom thumbs or if you had any questions. Give a holler if you have a question.
okay. I'm just trying to find my memo again. Too many things open. Okay. And then the last thing is the working group. So I just wanted to update the group on the fact that Srini and Donna and Andrew met at the, I guess, 2 days after our last meeting. Ann and I were able to staff that and it worked really well. You'll see some of the progress in the thermal sector. And so we're willing to keep up that idea of doing working groups. And the thinking is that we could meet prior to a scheduled task force meeting to review the sector and make some changes that would be included in the packet for the full task force to discuss. I wanted to get your feedback on this, on whether we should move forward with scheduling these. I hope that the calendar will work in our favor on this. So I guess maybe we could do thumbs up again and then have a separate conversation about who is going to be part of those working groups according to the sector. And I think limiting it to 3 people is needed.
Okay, good.
Okay, seeing more thumbs up. Okay, so Ann and I will work together to figure out what that working group schedule is going to be. I am going to scroll down. Sorry if I'm making anybody's motion sickness with my scroll. Okay, here is the revised schedule. The task force asked for a revised schedule. So here we are, April 14th. We'll finish up the conversation about transportation and land use.
Can I have a question, Melanie? If I'm looking at your screen, I cannot look at my packet. I can't access my own for some reason.
If you double click on the on the window, it usually comes down from full screen and will let you move it aside.
Okay. Right, because I'm looking at the same document as you, but I prefer to look at mine. Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, thanks for troubleshooting that, Ethan. So at the next meeting, April 27th, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be looking at the targets and the inventory. There might actually be an opportunity to start talking about another sector if the timing could work, maybe not. But definitely on May 9th, begin talking about government operations and renewable energy generation actions. So those are the next 2 sectors that are
Wait,
coming
is that
up.
May 9th? I thought it was May 11th.
Oh, sorry, it's meeting 9, May 11th.
Oh, thank you.
Apologies.
No, that's okay.
So just in terms of the subgroups, start thinking about who wants to be on that subgroup, because we will have to schedule that soon to talk about government operations and renewable energy generation. After that, May 25th is the next meeting. So it's getting compressed, accepting those sectors, and then begin talking about solid waste, natural areas, agricultural, and climate adaptation resilient actions. I know that seems like a lot of sectors compressed in one, but we've taken care of the big sectors that contribute the most to greenhouse gases and energy consumption, and that's thermal and transportation. So the hope is that these will go a little bit quicker than the previous two sectors.
Where do we have land use?
So at the last meeting, and I'm glad you're asking that, Michael, at the last meeting, we discussed that transportation would be kind of renamed to transportation and land use, because we have numerous actions that are land use oriented and have an impact on reducing vehicle miles traveled already in the list of actions that we've been reviewing. And then, so the sector that could also be considered land use, but we've kind of evolved to be named as natural areas, that deals mostly with carbon sequestration and vegetation. So that would be the natural areas section. And then the other component would be agriculture. So it's sort of like land use is a big bucket. It's like VMT reduction, vegetation, natural areas, and agriculture. So we sort of divided it. The thinking is that we would divide it amongst those three.
Because we have science-based solutions, but the nature-based solutions would be in there somewhere, and they need to be. We mustn't overlook them. Let's put it that way.
You're a little garbled in your statement. Can you repeat that?
I'm saying we shouldn't lose sight of the nature-based solutions when we're looking at the items listed under meeting 10.
That's correct. Yeah.
Because
so the nature-based solutions are considered natural areas, and we can, we could consider renaming that to be, nature-based solution sector, so that it, represents the actions that are contained within that sector.
If that's going to include carbon sequestration, I think we could put science behind that, right? You could kind of figure out how much carbon an acre of forest could absorb and have goals for increasing forestation. So I don't know, I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah, I've made some notes that reforest land, work with NRP landowners to reforest all or part of their land. There's the city could purchase TDRs and then reforest that land. So there are quite a few things.
That's great. That's exactly the kind of thinking that we are anticipating for the discussion on natural areas.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't necessarily need to go into the minutia of all of the schedule, but just wanted to lay out a plan going forward to keep us on target.
I had a couple of questions about the June 9th, the public engagement side of things. What form will public engagement take? Surveys, yeah, maybe, but in my experience, surveys aren't very useful because you don't get enough respondents unless it's a really exciting survey. In the past, the city has been quite successful in drawing in the public when they set up public workshops and visiting sessions, facilitated by CCRPC or staff and task force members or an outside facilitator. hired by the city, how many sessions of that type would we anticipate? And so the question is, are we anticipating that kind of thing? Real working sessions.
So I'm gonna defer to Paul on that because the city is lead on the public engagement effort and we're gonna
It
support
wasn't
the city's
necessarily,
effort.
it wasn't necessarily a question for you. It was a general question to everybody to think about.
Yes, Michael, as I said earlier, we are working with the city manager's office, I think, on what we're pretty excited about, a coordinated way of doing outreach to include in-person meetings and surveys and reaching out to people through, maybe less traditional models, like somebody had mentioned the Sobu Nights Out. The library, though it's physically the same location, has a very different constituency than normal meetings. So we're pretty excited, and I think we're trying to think of it as a coordinated thing, because some of what we or the planning commission are working on are a little ethereal, whereas some other things like the ARPA money is a very tangible, how would you spend X million dollars, which might draw more people out to be talking about something a little more tangible, which if you can get those people in a room, then you can ask them questions that they might otherwise not have spent an evening to come out and talk about. So
we might reach some people that are difficult to reach with the help of the Champagne Housing Trust, for example. Some of the folks who've benefited from what the Housing Trust has done. And some of those, I think, could be quite marginalized groups. So it would be good to pull them in somehow.
So, Paul, is there some kind of input that would be most helpful, since it sounds like you're making some progress with this already, but I also hear that there's a lot of ideas around the task force, and I'm just trying to understand what is the most productive way to get all that feedback together, get all the thoughts, and then get them coalesced into something that we understand how we can support, reaching out to groups or populating surveys, or what are the specific steps that would be most useful?
okay, let me noodle on that a little bit, Ethan. As I said, we're in the process of developing all this, but maybe either your April 27th or May 11th meeting, we can have something for folks to respond to a little bit more and get some feedback on, and what roles we can, as part of that, we can think of what roles can you all play in support of this, whether it's things like that Ethan, Keith or Steve spoke about, writing a letter in the other paper, or things to show that it's not just a staff-driven outreach, that it is a community outreach. So let us come back to you with something to respond to on this.
Thanks.
All right, so just to wrap up the schedule, the goal is to have a very rough draft of the final plan deliverable at the end of June. I really appreciate the acceptance of sort of the vision for the deliverable. That really helps to move this along. And then, subsequent to that, we will be obtaining feedback from the task force as we move forward. And then the final sort of end post goal is September 8th, final draft of the plan presented to the task force and the city council. So that's just an overview of the schedule. With that, I think I'm going to stop sharing, and we can go into the sector conversation about land use and transportation. And we were thinking that it would be best to maybe edit the actions while you guys are talking to make sure that we're capturing your thoughts. So I could, if people want, I can share my screen again so we can see where we left off. and begin that conversation, but I should defer to Ethan because
Melanie, are we gonna jump into transportation, or are we gonna maybe go back to some of the building items, or?
Yeah. I had gone back and have a couple of questions I'd like to ask before I bail out.
Okay, Michael.
Because in particular, we had that question about, energy efficiency, which I think is probably important to chat about.
Yeah, in the buildings and thermal thermal, there's a typo there, but it's a thermal sector. I had a question on it's B2 and elsewhere, where we talk about developing a preferential tax rate for commercial. And I'm wondering why only for commercial, because probably the most money spent to date has been spent by individual homeowners for, rooftop solar and other alternative energy sources. So why not incentivize them as well? Why is it restricted to commercial buildings?
Well, Michael, there's something in B2.13 as well.
Beg your pardon?
B2.13. B2.
B2.13. I'm scrolling
Development
there.
preferential tax rate, right?
Yeah, so B2.13, so the B2 section is single family homes.
It's
So there is,
residential, yeah.
B213 is a develop a penalty for homes with disproportionately high use of fossil fuels and develop a preferential tax rate or other incentive for highly efficient homes.
Maybe you should say for homes not using fossil fuels. That's probably what it should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But highly efficient. What about not penalizing, but rewarding people who invest in efficiency or alternative energy, or which is a form of efficiency. So I'll leave that, but it's a question I had, and
So Mike, do you just want two parallel statements? The one for commercial, and then down lower, just have the same statement for residential? I mean, is that what you want?
Yes.
so does that mean breaking out B-2.13 into two actions?
Yeah.
No,
Develop
it means
preferential.
B2.5 is, oh wait, I'm sorry, I have the wrong number.
Yeah.
It's,
No, just repeat B2.7 or the other one, but for residential.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what that misses out is the consideration that you could, you have carried out a step, right?
Yeah. Because I need to leave fairly soon, so I did have a question on B3.3, which is that the net zero building code?
Yes.
Yes.
Why don't we say so?
I mean, we
No.
do say so.
No, there's
Um,
one specifically for net zero. It's 3.6, B3.6.
Yes.
Hmm.
And this is the net zero pathway.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And then just B3.5, encourage low GHG emitting materials. Might we add something that it's encouraged until such time as the state establishes guidelines, and then it'll become a requirement to comply?
I don't think there will ever be a requirement to do that. It's not, oh boy. I've had this discussion with people at Energy Futures Group, and it's probably one of those things that you're going to have to encourage and provide some incentive for doing it. because there's no way that you can mandate that. You just can't. You just can't do it. We can talk about later why that's true, but I don't want to go into it right now. But it's
I'm
some of
more
the,
interested in.
you have to be careful when you're asking things on this list to make sure it is actually possible. And that one is not possible.
My question then, Donna, would be not why we can't do it, but how we can.
Right, but encouraging it. That's why I think encourage is the right word.
Okay, well, encourage is, I'm going to,
It may seem weak. It may seem weak, maybe, but
okay.
there's a whole bunch of things in here that sound weaker than what we originally proposed, but I understand why that might be the case.
Okay, I will, I may be able to rejoin you later, but I'm going to bail out for the moment. I'm just being.
So I would like to talk about
Thank you, Michael.
the thing. I think that the pathway, and I'd love Melanie and Anne's thoughts on this. The pathway, the first pathway, weatherization, should probably really be weatherization / efficiency. And we should add kind of efficiency actions under that. Because efficiency is obviously really, really important, right?
Right.
Probably the best way to the most renewable energy is energy not used, right? So I think that's really, really important. We kind of give a little bit of short shrift here.
I think in the state parlance, weatherization and building energy efficiency are the same thing.
Okay, well, so then if we just then clarifying it here won't change anything if we just say
Right.
weatherization / efficiency.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Good idea.
Yeah, we can work on adding that in for the next iteration.
Okay.
This pathway.
Can I ask a sort of broader question? Because without sort of digging into the issue that Donna was bringing up about the challenges with trying to change supply chains that are way outside of our direct control, like building materials, that sounded to me like the sort of thing that we've talked about in a few different areas, that we can't directly solve everything we want to solve, but we can lobby the state, work with the state, and lobby federally, like try to make some of the larger scope changes happen so that we get the benefits of them, even if we can't control them just within the scope of South Burlington. And I don't know if we have specifically called those out. I mean, policy and promotion and investment, none of those really sort of define that. And I wonder if we just need like a place to capture some of those things where they come up, where we say, we know we want this to happen. We can't do it alone. We need to work with others. It feels like they're kind of scattered in there, and it might be a distinct category. I mean, within each one of the different topic areas, but like a type of activity. Is that something that people feel is worth capturing, or do we just want to describe them in a promotion area or something like that? Or I don't know, what's the best way of making sure that we don't lose those?
I think this might get into like, what is the base draft action, and then the full report can get into a lot of those things in more detail. I mean, it seems like that's more of a discussion, because I mean, I would also say, why don't we ever mention actually, getting together with builders in South Burlington and find out, are any of them willing to take some steps forward, and that we would help promote that. We don't talk about that at all either, but there's a lot of things like that we probably aren't going to get to in this first round.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think what you're describing is true and can get into more detail in the report. Promotion can certainly be a two-way street. And maybe I'm reading into your comment incorrectly about the need for some of those things to be solved at a national standards type level or a state standards type level. But I don't know. Just generally speaking, is that a category of actions or a place that we need to keep track of things to lobby higher geographic area governments about? Because we talked about it early on that,
Well, I think there's some of that, Ethan, already. If you look under B14 in promotion, it says encourage low greenhouse gas emitting materials and weatherization, advocate for the state to establish guidelines. I mean, we have that type of phrase in several places, I think.
so I guess if, are folks comfortable just keeping it inside promotion, and that's a type of promotion is to,
I think so.
okay.
I'm saying South Burlington should promote it with the state. I mean, I don't think we want to add any more boxes, you know?
Yeah, I'm not trying to complicate things. It just sounded like we were potentially needing to leave things on the cutting room floor because we didn't know where to put them. So if we're comfortable keeping them in promotion, that works for me.
I know we don't want to add any boxes, but early on in this process, we talked about a column that evaluates whether the city has the authority to do it or not the authority to do it. So we can bring that back in, and that might help to prioritize the actions for the implementation plan in terms of identifying like what's low-hanging fruit to do in like the first year.
Melanie, don't we have
Just an idea.
one of
We
the,
have enough columns. No more
Okay.
columns, please.
one of the hidden, I mean, if you unhide, I think one of the
Yeah.
hidden is obstacles, right? Where, you know, I guess I anticipated we'd include some of that, and I know we haven't gotten there really, but I mean, that's fine, but I thought one of the columns was obstacles, and that's where you kind of,
Right.
So, I mean, yeah.
I mean, this always sounds to me when we get into these things like that, there are these different applications, right? There's concise things for overviews and, you know, looking at everything together and communicating to the public. And then there's like detailed views where we need to get into make sure that we don't lose the specifics. So there will be more than one view. Paul?
Well, I was just going to add that at least specific to the question of authority and that kind of thing, you know, I would advocate that is a great tool, but that's really for Melanie and Anne to fill out. It doesn't need to be a committee discussion about what we do and don't have authority. That's a statement of fact. And if they need other city resources or the city attorney to help them with it, but it can be given to the committee rather than being a source of discussion with the committee.
Yeah.
And to the extent that, you know, we can, save everybody's time by having lengthy debates, and we can just bring that to you.
So it sounds like the need is still there, but we don't need to discuss it. It doesn't necessarily need to be a column. It'll be baked into the deliverable in some way. Does that sound good to folks? Okay.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question in terms of if the action plan is going to identify actions for the city plan for which we don't have authority, why would we include it in the city's action plan?
Because the city could work with legislators to advocate for a certain outcome. The city could also work with organizations to amplify their work. So that would, that would be the thinking of including things that the city doesn't necessarily have influence over, or, things can change.
I mean, Helen, example I was thinking about, Burlington went, I think it was on the ballot for them to ask the legislature for authority to regulate some of these things. So if it's something that the city decides it wants to do, at least we know that's the pathway.
Paul?
I was just gonna, I think, say essentially the same thing, and say that, it might, the column might not be authority as necessary actions to implement, and it might be that our action or the city's role is to, work with or encourage Vermont Gas to do something, or it might be to lobby the legislature. I think in each of these, the action would have a city role to play. And And that role could change over time, as Andrew said. If, you know, if the first action is that we need to get authority to do something, then the second action becomes, now we've got authority, let's get it done. But I think that the plan stopped short intentionally of things that we have no influence over, like, you know, we're not likely to have a heavy influence over federal cafe standards for cars. So, you know, let's leave that out, for example.
Yeah. No embodied carbon tariffs.
All right, well, you asked, Paul, you answered the next question about adding another pathway about cafe standards in this, sounds like we're leaving that out. It'll be in the modeling, but the city doesn't have influence over it. Okay, so I just want to check the bottom. So,
Yeah, that's the one I was just gonna go
yeah.
to.
So we had some questions about promoting whole home energy efficiency measures to reduce overall energy use. I think we already answered that by putting it in the first pathway. And then there was another question. This came up at the subgroup about existing building electrification retrofits paired with energy storage. So this was a new action that came up in that discussion. And the question was whether this kind of action fits here in buildings and thermal, or we should consider it when we talk about the renewable energy generation sector.
Well, it seems like the energy storage kind of goes along more with renewables, although it can happen in a house or a commercial building. Doesn't necessarily have to be in residential. And that would take it away from having to put it in 3 different places if you put it in the
Right.
renewables section.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point about the organization.
I agree with that. I think we can wait for
Yeah.
to talk about this one.
Okay,
Unless it's a code issue or something like that, that should be with other code topics, but
I can't spell in a meeting, apparently. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think there's any current code issues with that.
I mean, creating a code requirement in order to get it done.
For energy storage?
I'm
There's
not
no
saying,
code. Yeah, I don't think there's any code that's addressing that at all. Maybe in the future there will be, but I don't know of any now.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just asking the question, that's the only reason that I would see it being part of buildings, is if there was some other thing like that. So, okay.
All right, I am going to switch the tab and go to the transportation sector.
Can you, Melanie, can you collapse the, if you're not using the tools on the ribbon, to give us a few more rows? A little up arrow on the upper, yeah, you know where it is. Thank you.
Ethan, before you move on, I think that the objective here was to have an official sign off for this first round.
Thank
So
you.
I'd love to get an action of voting to say, this isn't the final, but it is the first draft, that you're done for now with the building and thermal sector, so that you can officially move on to the next sectors.
I move that we accept this draft as, with any changes that we put in today, that we accept this as our draft 1, and we're going to move on thermal, and we're going to move on.
Second that motion.
Thanks, Andrew. All right. All in favor of accepting the current version as draft 1?
Well, with the changes that we talked about.
With the
Correct.
changes we talked about. Thank you, Andrew. Say aye.
Aye.
Bill, I see a thumb there, so we've got enough. That's 5 of us. Great. 5 in favor, none opposed. Unless someone's lurking. Okay. Great. So yeah, so thank you, Paul, for catching that. Melanie? Transportation?
Okay, so this draft is an evolution of the transportation land use actions that incorporate the conversation that we had the last time. So the purple represents the changes that we made to address the comments that we heard at the last meeting. We got through down to where it's, I thought there was a space in here that said where we stopped.
I think there's a row that's hidden that had
Yeah.
that comment.
I think we stopped. Sorry. I think we stopped around, I think this was the last action that we discussed, which makes sense because the red text represents comments that we heard prior to
Right,
sending
right.
this out.
Right.
So I think we should resume the conversation starting at T 2.8, if folks agree.
Can I just make one comment about T 1.5, the mileage smart program? I think that program is not just about electrification. It's also getting folks from less efficient vehicles into, smaller, more efficient vehicles. So I'm not sure it exactly fits there.
Okay. We can work on that.
Okay.
Because we now have a section for efficiency, for MPG efficiency. Is that true?
We kind of parked it right at the bottom.
Yeah, I guess there was that question about energy, MPG efficiency, and that it would happen, as a market-driven thing, and South Burlington would not necessarily have influence over it.
Paul?
I wonder whether, I'm not exactly sure how to do this, but I feel like several of these things here, some of them are specific to electrification, and some of them are moving in the direction of more efficiency and electrification. Like a hybrid car is halfway there, and it is a good step in the coming years, and these things can achieve that without being fully electric. And maybe
We can
T
make a
1.5,
pathway.
as Andrew is saying, is sort of along those same lines.
The pathway could be vehicle electrification and efficiency. And the target is, EVs, because that's what we're going to measure. But maybe the pathway can just say and efficiency.
Right, and maybe there's a way to do monitoring in the meantime of actions that have gotten us in that direction.
Yeah.
Just to recognize that it isn't an all or none discussion over the next 10 years.
That makes sense.
So I guess my concern might be that from what I understand about transportation, and it's a little further outside my expertise, plug-in hybrids and electrics both have pretty significant improvements, but I think we've tried in other sectors to be careful not to sort of send a message to the public that doing relatively small actions when we have such a long way to go is adequate, right? We're not going to spend our time telling people to change light bulbs, right? Like that's sort of been done. So similarly,
I don't know about that. I think we should spend our time telling people to change light bulbs.
okay, maybe that's not the example, but anyway, just a question of like, does it water down the message that people need to go to vehicle electrification?
I guess, Ethan, what I would say is I agree with your statement. And also when Melanie and Ann look through the equity lens of this, it may be that for lower income families, the objective has to be how do we get more efficient used cars in their hands over the next 5 years that won't necessarily be fully electric.
There was a great VPR program. That's why I'm just reminding me on this mileage smart program where they got, people were driving these 10 mile, per gallon big SUVs, and they got, these $5,000 used Priuses into people's hands. And I mean, that's huge, right? You can go from 10 to 50. and they were only $5,000 because they were used. And I mean, that's like, boy, that's a pretty big win.
Well, I think we do have to be conscious that not everything makes sense for, not every best case solution makes sense for every person. And that for some people, it's going to make more sense to keep a gas powered car and use more public transportation. Or some people just probably aren't going to ever feel comfortable in an electric car, but a hybrid might make more sense for them. And for me, I drive very little, so I bought an e-bike, but I'm going to keep my car. I'm going to keep my gas powered car, as long as I can, because I don't have to drive very much. So let's just not assume that an electric car is the solution for everybody, because it's probably not.
Again, even like the most electric, I mean, I'm a huge fan of electric cars, but even the kind of the most ambitious policies really around the world are, no new electric cars by 2030, 2035, right? So even like the most ambitious kind of contemplate that you're going to have existing gas cars around for quite a long time.
Right.
Yeah, I guess my point wasn't that we should take a hard line and not be willing to talk to people unless they're willing to do everything on this list immediately. But that, do we put things on the list that aren't, like, we have to pick where we're going to spend our time, right? And so just the question of, and I'm not going to, continue to try to litigate, the question of efficiency, but there are plenty of incremental things that we can do. But when we prioritize what we want to spend our time on, I assume that we want to try to focus on the things that we think we can move the furthest and are going to have the biggest impact. And the fact that some people will do some things that we don't promote and that are still good, that's fantastic, right? We don't have to say everything that, right?
I think one case, when you look at T1.4, see that one, we've only talked about electric and high efficiency vehicles, but we really need to consider that too many kids are lead foots, and that you need to educate them about driving like a sane person, and like how that's bad for the planet to drive like a lead foot.
Yeah, Paul.
Ethan, I think I agree. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with it. I think that the thing that would give me a little bit of pause is if we got some data out there saying, and this is speculation, not a statement of fact. If we got some data out there saying that 5% of the vehicles on the road are causing 60% of the emissions, I think that, it then becomes, maybe we should have an action of how do we get rid of those 5% of the vehicles? Because changing 70% of the highest efficiency ones may not be the biggest bang for the climate buck. And I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's sort of maybe a next step of, if there was that kind of situation out there, that might be a reason to say, boy, if we could get those to be even just better gas ones, that would be a huge climate benefit.
So I would absolutely agree that if we identify things and discover that they have a huge impact, I don't think that's at all in conflict with what I was just saying. I think there's potentially some question about how much benefit in the whole picture does improving the efficiency of gas cars to more efficient gas cars have to do with it. And I don't know the answer to that either. I wasn't trying to claim that, but my larger point is just, we don't have to put everything that's possible on the list, and we should try to focus on the things that we think are the biggest bang for the buck. Which I think is completely consistent with what you're saying, Paul, that if we recognize that there's something that we didn't expect to be that actually has a huge impact, then I would 100% support, then that should absolutely be on the list. So that's just the lens of like, there's lots and lots of things we can do. Let's make sure that we're spending our time on the most impactful. That's all.
So are any edits needed to the actions? Maybe one, we could add eco driving to T1.4 to Donna's point. That was an easy one. I figured I'd throw that out there.
Yep.
And do we need an action that says something about like evaluating the fuel efficiency of vehicles in South Burlington.
Do we have one like that?
No, but in terms of, to Paul's point about
And
trying to
to target
change
the-
5% of the
efficient.
most emitting vehicles.
I think that my question was more general than specific. It was, how do we have a thing in here that says, if we identify something that is disproportionately bad, how do we, that should be prioritized? It wasn't necessarily about the vehicles. It was sort of a, if something medium could have a huge effect, return on investment, that should get a high priority.
Well, sort of like the garbage trucks, having 5 garbage companies all traveling to one neighborhood. Seems like you should be able to cut by about 50% the fuel used in garbage pickups.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, that should be a high priority one, because that seems really easy. You're not even asking them to fuel switch. You're just telling them, coordinate your routes.
So the question though, Paul, what I and I think this was what Melanie's question was as well, is part of what I hear in your point is that we might struggle a little bit deciding about the priority level for some of these items, because we don't really know what is the target market, how hard is it to move, how far could we move it, right? And so we can sit here and say, well, based on the last cars that I saw when I was driving around last week, here's what I think is the case. But part of what I heard you saying is like, let's make our decision ultimately, and maybe this is down the road in the implementation plan process, that it's worth investing some time in either doing a survey or like doing some research to see if there's some data out there that would inform us. And I mean, I know it's down the road to put like scale questions on, scale factors on some of these items, but
I mean, in the buildings and thermal sector, I believe there's an action there that says, identify the worst performing buildings and
Right.
improve them. That's sort of the statement here of, if it's a high return on investment, identify the worst performing and make improvements, and that improvement may not necessarily bring it all the way to electric, if the return on investment can be something really fantastic. And I don't know that this is even necessarily a South Burlington action to do, but maybe it's something, just like you used to be able to with Efficiency Vermont, if your fridge was green or brown, you turn it in and they give you $50. How do we encourage something like that to say, if your car is one of these ones, we will pay you to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily us, it's us and our partners.
Right. From an equity standpoint, that would be a really important thing. If you're driving a really old car that gets poor gas mileage, come to us, we'll help you. From an equity standpoint, that would be on the top of the list.
it was Cash for Clunkers was the federal program.
Yeah, and I think that I'm upset. I can't remember what it is, but there was a proposal to do something kind of Vermont homegrown, similar to Cash for Clunkers. It was pitched at an Energy Action Network meeting a few years ago, and maybe that's what Mileage Smart has evolved into.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
that's what Mileage Smart is.
That's what I was thinking. So I guess given that this is one of those actions that South Burlington may not be able to solve on its own, maybe by promoting Mileage Smart is part of the way there. Just wondering if me and Ann need to do some thinking on a proposed action that helps to answer this question about evaluating sort of the biggest bang for the buck and figuring out like what the mix of the fleet is in South Burlington. I mean, maybe just some data on, we know how many EVs there are and how does that compare to the total fleet?
If we got the missing fields that we'd asked for from DMV about registration town, then we'd have that data, but look on your faces, they said no.
Yeah, I think it's coming to a dead end. I asked a lot of questions a lot of times, and I think I'm not getting it.
Okay.
But we do have data on what the fuel type is. So we might be able to tease this out a little bit. And so maybe it's just something that we include in the narrative about
so
what
certainly
the fleet mix is.
we can analyze the data that you did get, which isn't a count, but it might give us a representative percentage of car ages and types, and it won't only be South Burlington or all of South Burlington, but it's something. And we can think about what are the ways that, who are the local partners that we can use to promote some of these other policies. So
Yeah. Okay.
Can we get down to T 2.1, which I think we already discussed, but I think it might make it a little more clear if we use fewer words on this one. I think it should say, work with school districts to develop policy or roadmap for encouraging children or encouraging parents about riding the bus, well, encouraging students to ride the bus to reduce single occupancy. There's just too many words in there, and it.
Okay, we can fix this.
Yep.
Offline.
Right.
Yeah, because getting excited about it doesn't buy you anything.
If I can interject, Chris Trombley had a hand up. Chris, did you want to make a comment about the last topic, or?
Just when the time's right, just a couple comments before you vote on this section.
Okay, well,
thanks.
Sure, we'll open it up for the public at the end of review.
Okay, so I'm gonna scroll down to where we left off the last time. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
What did I say? This one. Okay, so foster higher density mixed use development and redevelopment through land development regulations in areas with existing or planned reliable transit options.
I think you skipped a couple. Because I don't remember talking about T 2.7.
Okay, I mean, that may have been at the end of the meeting. I know we added this concept about parking disincentives from the last meeting, but we can start here.
Yeah, I had a question about this one because I'm not really sure who you're asking. Who does transportation demand management? Is that the city's role to do that, or
Donna,
what?
I can answer that question.
Okay.
We have a current project with the Regional Planning Commission to replace what we currently call our traffic overlay district in our zoning with a transportation demand management system that would essentially incentivize and require TDM, the types of measures that you see in here to reduce vehicle travel. It's sort of a combination of carrots and sticks, and it's closely related to this system that the state is putting together.
Okay.
But yes, so that's an active project to put this in place.
That sounds excellent.
We're very excited about it.
Okay.
Okay, so going on to 2.8. So this is another one of those actions that, ties together land use and transportation and has a impact on reducing vehicle miles traveled. I think the concept behind this action is to inform some of the policy considerations that the Planning Commission could consider in updating the comprehensive plan. We had a comment from Darylyn about revising this action, and that's what's in red.
Right. And let me explain that. I put this in because at the time, we were talking about how thermal and transportation are the huge part of greenhouse gas reductions and all of this. And I thought I heard somebody say, we may not get to some of those other things like agriculture, those government. There's only one item in the first go round of ideas. There's only one item in government, and it's actually could be someplace else. And I was worried that we would never address this issue, and it's an equity issue. So we have to, so I wanted to see that we had something on affordable housing in this. Now, if we're going to have a land use section, and I think we aren't we going to combine it with transportation? What are we doing?
Yeah, so we're kind of getting into the actions that represent the nexus between transportation and land use here.
Right, right. And so that's why I added that. I mean, I think I need to think it through a little better, because I did that pretty fast to make sure, you know, like to jog my memory that we may never get it over in land use in a separate area. But we're going to have to talk about it. And it seems to me there should be a much stronger endorsement with land use on redevelopment and infill and all those things, because you've already, you know, got all of this concrete and parking lots, and you've already done all of that. So now let's do redevelopment and infill rather than building brand new things where there is none of that.
Redevelopment and urban infill. Urban infill.
Well,
Some people use infill to mean different things.
well,
Well,
except I don't, well, yeah, you and I have a slightly different definition of South Burlington.
We do.
I think it's pretty developed.
When you say infill, Darrell, so that's what I thought.
But infill is, you know, between here, this building and this building.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
well, and also infill can mean an accessory dwelling unit in the back of a 3,500 square foot house.
And
you know,
they're all
on a 3rd acre lot too. So I wouldn't call it urban
One thing I'm
necessarily.
saying is that some people, for instance, refer to like the long proposal as infill, and I'm just trying to
Oh,
differentiate.
I see what you're
That's
saying.
not
Oh,
all.
yeah, that's a different issue.
I'm
I
just trying to
always think of
differentiate
it, I
that.
always think of it as, you know, the pizza place that's gone out of business and it's got
I agree with
space
that.
next to it. And we gotta develop all of that.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
so
and
anyway, I
would
think
would
we
it
need,
would it work to kind of simplify that and just say foster higher density mixed use development and affordable redevelopment? Or, I mean, include the word
oh, you want
affordable in there.
redevelopment here. If you're gonna develop anything, you want it redevelopment. I mean, it does, what am I trying to say? There can be commercial redevelopment, there can be residential redevelopment, there can be affordable housing redevelopment.
Affordable housing,
You know, it could be all of this.
right?
So redevelopment is the bigger issue if you're talking about greenhouse gases and climate change. But affordability in residential is the equity portion of that, and we just can't not address that, I believe.
Well, what if you just put and affordable housing redevelopment? You know, and you know, because it doesn't say housing before, so I agree with you that the words affordable housing should be somewhere in that in that sentence.
Right. And we do want it with existing or planned reliable transit option. I mean, I like the end of that sentence too,
Right,
because that also makes it more affordable.
right. No, I agree with the intent of that. I just don't think we need that many words.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do we want to leave it to staff to, or do you want
Well, I
to
think if you just
that?
put in affordable housing redevelopment.
You kind of want all kinds of redevelopment too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Redevelopment, including affordable.
And affordable housing with
Yes.
redevelopment.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we will work on this, but it sounds like there's Paul's raising his hand.
I was just going to say, I know that some of these ones are a little bit squishier than some of the other ones, and to a certain extent, that's by design here, because the climate action plan is obviously a critical plan in the city, but it's also leading directly in to the city's comprehensive plan that the Planning Commission is going to be working on, and there will be, in our view, some really specific, much more specific statements about both how to achieve the land use and setting measurable goals that around, what does it mean to have mixed use development and redevelopment in these areas that I think might more properly live in that part of the discussion for the comprehensive plan. But this can lead into it and give the very strong climate angle to it. So
Right.
that would be my suggestion. And then Andrew, you're on the line there, so I'm tasking you and the rest of the commission with when we get to the comp plan, which is starting in about a month, that gets tied in. And yeah.
Well, and so you're suggesting, as I would agree, that starting from require that new development, that part be eliminated from this because it's too specific.
Yeah, it doesn't belong here.
So
Right. I think it might be the right statement, but not in this document.
Right.
Can I ask then, Paul, because that's a good point, that that process is about to happen, and that is where the policies are actually going to get made, right? That dictate what people can and can't do for building in the city, right? Or what they ought to do, or whatever the right terminology is there. Where this would actually get implemented. What would your advice be about how this group and this process and the climate action plan can set some parameters and articulate, if not tactics, at least strategies and goals, and how do we support that process and give information to that process? Because it seems to me that if that process is going to happen and is where we're going to actually form the specific language that's going to articulate these things, that it would be great if, when you all in the planning committee are working on that, you could look back and say, you know what, this policy we're crafting right now, it isn't strong enough because the climate action plan says we need to do X, Y, Z, even if we haven't thought of it in this team.
I think that's a great question, Ethan. I think what you have in here is going directly in that direction. So setting a objective of 10% vehicle mile traveled reduction has a cascading set of policies to implement that. That is a very hard policy to implement, and it includes all sorts of things like having a convenience store right nearby, about having infill, like Donna was just talking about, of an accessory apartment in the back of a unit. Some of these ones here, you could say, instead of foster, you could say prioritize. You could say something that's sort of saying like, that this is, you could strengthen the words. I was just trying to not have this become the land use plan, but strengthen that all of these things that are also good planning are climate implementation actions. And there's not that we need another reason, but it's another reason to do these things that are also good planning.
So,
I like that word, prioritize. That's good, Paul.
So through that lens, and your point that setting this very clear goal of 10% reduction in VMT will put boundaries on the planning activity, is there a way to articulate the affordability goal with a similar sort of rigor, right? Like we don't want affordability to wind up being something where you're like, oh, and an affordable unit got created, so check the box, did affordability, right? So
That's
like,
right.
is there something similar where like, a representative amount of, I don't even know what the right term is, but I mean, basically what I'm hearing in the affordable housing, the way it meshes in with transportation and climate, is that we want people of all incomes to be able to take advantage of the benefits of these new patterns, right, to reduce their transportation impacts and costs.
I think that's a great question. I think that the way that Darylyn just phrased it in terms of it's an equity thing, it's also, I would say, it's a disproportionate impact thing. So what we,
Right.
something we know right now is that if somebody's living not near a transit route, that they've got a higher, regardless of who lives away from a transit route, they will have a higher carbon emission if they have to drive everywhere, but there'll be a disproportionate impact to people who don't have another option. I would also even then say, if we look at South Burlington as a whole and the region as a whole, a lot of lower income people have to travel from Georgia, Fairfax, et cetera, to do anything to get a job. And so prioritizing finding ways to get affordable housing in our community to help those people will have huge implications. So maybe there's a way to phrase some of that in there. That it's not just because we want to be nice people, it's because
Exactly.
they
You're
are
right.
disproportionately likely to either suffer the effects of higher costs or have to make choices that are carbon negative to the objectives here. You know, that they have to drive an hour each way because they just can't find somewhere to live here and their job is here.
Right.
And that's sort of, I don't know that I know that there was a little bit of not every, 2.9 was something that I sort of tossed in there as just a starting point to a conversation, but it was sort of that part of the conversation that maybe others have a better way of thinking about that. But I was trying to just capture that statement of, you know, if somebody is being forced to drive from, like I said, Fairfax to come into South Burlington every day, how do we help that not be the case? So maybe there's a better way to phrase that, but that's what I was sort of trying to capture that otherwise isn't necessarily captured in here.
Well, maybe we could capture that in the previous one. I mean, I'm trying to think about how to do that, because you really don't want to say that everybody who drives to work, that we're going to provide housing to everybody who drives to work. I don't think you can house everybody.
No, I was trying to, you know, looking back from the very beginning of what Melanie and Ann presented, knowing that there are a lot of people who have a trip of less than 5 miles, and that those are the ones that have the best chance to be something other than a car trip. How do
Right.
we encourage that? And then how do we make it so that, like you just said, maybe put it into the last one of not forcing people to have to be traveling huge distances just to get to their job.
Well, I think it has to be to focus on city center and along existing transit lines, because I mean, a 5 mile radius, I mean, South Burlington is probably only, what, 2-3 miles wide? So a 5 mile radius is like, I mean, entire South Burlington, a lot of surrounding areas. And I mean, that like conflicts with a lot of other goals that we have.
It wasn't my intent to conflict, so I think your point's a good point, Andrew. And I think my thought was recognizing that people are fluid between where they work and then where they live based on the data of, you know, they might work in South Burlington and work in Burlington, and they might work in Williston and live in South Burlington. How do we foster it so that they have other transportation options nearby? So maybe city center and our corridors is the way to double down on that, where we have transit, where we've got bike lanes, et cetera.
That's how I would phrase it.
I would just suggest that maybe another thing that the city could do is to work with or encourage the state to really think about supporting economic development in other places than the center of Chittenden County. So that, you know, if you live in Fairfax, there is reasonable employment that pays well, that's close to your home. So you don't really have to move to South Burlington in order to cut down on your carbon use. I don't know if that belongs in here, but it seems to me that's another part of the picture.
And encourage remote work.
Yeah, I mean, let's get
Yeah.
you know, businesses in other places than just Burlington and South Burlington and Williston. Otherwise, it's just always going to be an issue. As you say, Darrellyn, we would be unable to build enough houses for all the workers if the new businesses continue to expand only here.
Well, Helen, you're joining a very elite cadre of municipal leaders calling for the reduction in economic growth within their municipality
I
and
know.
growth to go
I was
elsewhere.
gonna say,
It's a
you are
radical,
right.
radical thought. I'm not disagreeing with you. It's
Yeah, no, there's
we-
another way to think about it. Let's think about this for a second.
I mean, I don't know that we necessarily need to choose between them, and I think they're just very different strategies, right? The things that we work with the state to do are much more of a long game and a long shot, because a lot of things have to go right, and many of them are outside of our control. And as hard as the things that we need to do within the city, at least we have more of the pieces within our control. So, you know, it's kind of it's a both and, but you know, I think it's a good point that we need to think about what is the system we're going toward and what is our role with, you know, with the other actors to create it. So
I could interject. Srini's not here, but he did give us some comments, and this is kind of relevant to what you're talking about. Srini said that about 80% of jobs in South Burlington are served by people from other towns. So how would this work for jobs within South Burlington? More people would move to South Burlington for jobs. So I think what he's saying is 80% of jobs that are in South Burlington are employed by people from other towns.
Is that right, Paul? I didn't think it was quite that high.
It's pretty high.
Yeah,
I would say
agree.
the asterisk I'd put on it is that doesn't mean that they're necessarily far away. It
Right.
just means that, you know, I think based on what Melanie and Ann presented back in January, if we were to think of a living and working catchment area of South Burlington, Burlington, Winooski, Williston, Essex,
Williston,
we'd
yes.
probably say that, you know, as 75% of the people live and work in some combination of those communities. And so if we think of
Exactly.
ourselves not just like a South Burlington bubble, but a core of Chittenden County bubble, I think that really helps, and it'll help us think about, like, you know, when we prioritize something like where do we put a bike path in, it's just as important that we connect to Williston as it is within our own community, because somebody might, you know, live right on the boundary of the two communities, and there doesn't seem to statistically be, people sort of fluidly use those 4 or 5 communities for their living and working purpose. Of course, our jurisdiction is only one of those, but yeah, I think that's maybe a way to sort of conceptualize this.
Right, and we're going to have even more hospital employees living in South Burlington with the UBM housing. You know,
Right.
that they're building.
Right. And if we can get that bridge built over the interstate, they can all walk or bike to work easily. So,
Exactly.
I mean, Paul, you said 5 miles, and Andrew, you pointed out that 5 miles extends outside of South Burlington. You know, I think this all sort of plays into your comment here, which is that if we're not just thinking about needing to solve the bubble, you know, solve the problem within our own bubble, then yeah, we're not against people living outside of South Burlington, as long as it's not, we want to avoid the 40-mile commute.
maybe there's a statement in here that says something like it recognizes that people use and work in a you know 4 or 5 mile radius for the majority of of folks, and how do we, you know, something along the lines of to help support people to be able to commute and travel between them fluidly, and to, maybe it's a second one, but to on the affordability front, help people to not have to do much longer commutes. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah,
But
so I think, I mean, this is I'm trying to conceptualize this into some actions, but I think it's kind of twofold, and I think we already have it in here. There's an action earlier, and I don't want to scroll and make you guys all nauseous, but you know, it's working with employers and, you know, educating them about the resources that are available through CATMA, our TDM partner,
Right.
and having them offer their employees. So like the responsibility is a little bit on the side of the businesses that are in South Burlington. So what they can offer to their employees to convert those trips to things that are not single occupancy vehicles. You know, what can they do to get their employees to take the bus and ride bikes or car share? So we have a statement in here. And then also
But
on the
none of
side
that
of the,
speaks to affordable housing.
right, that's what I was going to say. So then the other side of the coin is adding, you know, more affordable housing in city center and areas that are along transit options to, so it's like, it's coming at it from both sides. And I
Right.
think that we can't put it all in one action,
Right.
but I feel confident that we have 2 or maybe 3 actions that work to achieve that goal.
Okay.
Yeah, well, 2.8 and 2.9, I think, are the two sides of the coin.
Right,
You
and
know,
then there's
2.8
yeah.
really addresses the development, and 2.9 addresses the employers and the employer's role in, you know, identifying housing needs and working with the city to help meet them.
Right, and we have something more specific, at least I thought we did, that talks about working with businesses.
I thought we did too.
Yeah, it's got to be in here, but I'm reading and scrolling quickly, and if it's not in here, I will add it.
And Melanie, can I give you a little tip?
Yeah.
At the top of your screen, there's a pause share.
Oh.
You can spin around and look
Okay.
for what you're looking for
I
without making everybody else dizzy.
Okay, I found it. Now how do I unpause?
Hit the pause button again, just like a VCR.
Okay, there we go. Okay, here
What?
it is.
What?
I know, I said that on purpose.
What's a VCR? I am old enough to know what a VCR is. Partner with CATMA to increase membership among employers, city government, senior center, school district, and large employers, collection of employers in the city to reduce driving alone to work and encourage transit use through reduced fares, carpooling, telecommuting, and walking and biking. So this is that other side of the coin that I talked about, that, you know, there is a responsibility on the side of the employers to try and, you know, implement the climate action plan and reduce VMT of the people who live outside of South Burlington but are commuting to work here.
Right. Good.
Yeah, that all sounds right.
Okay, so we've had a lot of really good discussion. I think we need to do some work to capture the discussion. So Ann and I will get together and figure out the best possible solution for 8 and 9. Maybe I'm skipping too far ahead.
Can we go back, Melanie, just to 5? Can we add walking to 5?
This one?
Yeah.
It's pet is.
Ed.
Ted. Oh, well, Ted. Okay. Yes.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
and I-
I do think that's a good reminder, though, that we should scrub this at some point for
Mhm.
jargon,
Yeah.
just generally.
Yes.
That's fair.
Oh, and I just realized that the word option changes the meaning of this. What we really want to do is encourage more biking and walking to school. We already have a lot of options
Okay.
available, but we're just trying to encourage people to actually do it.
Right.
Well, I mean, the options to me says infrastructure, right? Do we have safe bike paths? Do we have crosswalks with?
We're working on it. Yeah.
Well,
We've got a lot of them in the works right now. But the issue isn't that we don't have them, it's that people aren't necessarily using them as much as they could be using them.
Okay.
Okay, that's
All
good.
right, so our
Oh,
folks,
the 2.10, I just wanted to make a comment about that. Is from the Bike and Ped Committee standpoint, so far, we've been treating bicycles with and without e-assist the same way. It's the same rules, no matter whether you have an e-bike or not. And so this one kind of, the policies are not different from e-bikes than for regular bikes.
How about segways allowed on bike paths?
Well, we haven't really seen any around here. Burlington had a few for a while, but it's the same rules, basically. It's
I'm-
like, don't go too fast and stay on your side. And
I'm joking because it was
know
a
your
very
time.
contentious issue in Burlington whether to allow segways on the bike path back before there were lots of e-bikes. Sorry, Paul.
Can I suggest, I really like what Srini wrote in here, but I think that the second half of the sentence might be getting lost, which is a really big separate thing from the rest of it.
Ah, yes.
That's an infrastructure thing that we have dipped our toe into, and Burlington has been doing a lot in the last few years of looking critically at key, even small intersections, saying, how do we make small improvements day by day, year by year to favor / make this a pedestrian and bicycle based community, not a how fast you drive through the city based community. And
Exactly.
retrofit is a big part of that. New development, we've got a lot of great stuff going on, but there's a lot that can be done in, say, the Chamberlain neighborhood to tighten up intersections and prioritize funding to do that kind of thing.
So
Yeah,
those
I think that's important. That's the important element in this one. And I think it goes along with one that there was a policy recommendation I wrote that got missed entirely, which was the city to provide pedestrians and bike riders with the same rights and privileges as drivers. Basically, right in South Burlington, bicyclists and pedestrians do not have the same rights to the road as vehicle drivers. There's just a fear that people on bicycles, people who aren't accustomed to riding bicycles, they don't go on the roads because they're afraid to. And
Donna,
that has to do with a whole climate of, it's basically what Paul started mentioning. It's just like the facilities aren't equivalent.
Donna, do you mean rights or do you mean perceived rights? Just to be clear on that.
bikes are allowed to take the lane.
I think what
Yeah,
you're saying is nobody feels comfortable taking
It's
the
more of a
lane.
perception. Yeah,
Okay.
it's more of a perception. And I think that has to do with the facilities.
Right. I just wanted to sort of put a point. It's not about changing laws. It's
Right, it's
about
not about
the
changing
infrastructure
Yeah.
providing an environment where there's a more equal footing of who should feel comfortable on that route.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Burlington has done a lot of striping, a lot of sharrows, a lot of doing things on the road to help allow bicyclists feel more comfortable there and feel like they belong there. And in South Burlington, people say, oh, give me a rec path because I don't want to go near the road. That's part of the perception of, I don't belong there, but it is a perception.
Yeah. Look at North Ave, right?
Right.
Pretty radical change. I want to flag a comment that Nick Anderson put in the chat a little while back that seems relevant here potentially, about creating a bike walk master plan.
Yep. Yeah.
And I wonder whether a lot of these individual things that we're talking about might sort of fit under that rubric of looking across longer time and space and prioritizing a whole bunch of actions, right? Master plans are good strategy for that.
Yeah, that would be a great strategy for that.
so maybe it would be expanding this concept about developing a vision for problem intersections And like, to me, like that seems like a
Not just
detail,
intersections. it's
right?
prob-
That would be in a walk bike master plan.
Exactly.
So maybe we need to evolve this action into creating a walk bike master plan that addresses some of these key points that Srini proposed.
Right, right.
Yep.
And it's not
Yes,
just the
and-
intersections, it's more than just the intersections.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so I'd say yes, and also as a, strategic policy / investment is recommending that the city invest in retrofits of infrastructure.
Yes.
So that there's the policy part of it of developing a plan, and then there's the financial part of it of
Investing in, yes.
investing in it. And many of the other things that we've talked about, the city doesn't have a direct investment role. We're sort of secondary investors in building thermal unless it's our own building, but the streets are our streets.
Right.
Right.
Because there's more than just striping. I mean, thinking back
Yeah,
about North
good
Ave,
point.
right? There were
Oh, yeah.
actual
Widenings, widenings of areas,
Narrowings.
safer intersections, narrowings,
Barriers.
yes, narrowings.
yeah.
There's a whole toolbox of things, but I think,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, so we can evolve this for the next.
So you can get all of that in, Melanie.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay to move on?
Yep.
Okay, so 11, we talked about that being a strategy for employers. Any more discussion on 11?
I think the only thing I would want to add there is that some of the most successful businesses that support carpooling, telecommuting, walking, biking, and everything, that they actually provide some financial or some kind of incentive, some kind of reward to people who use other than their own single passenger vehicle. National Life was very, very good at promoting this in Montpelier. And I think that this kind of fits in this one.
Okay,
Sorry, wait. What I heard you say, Donna, and what I see written.
Now for employees, not employers, employees.
oh, yeah, sorry, typing too quickly.
And
Thanks, Ethan.
sure. And maybe this is sort of implicit in there, but I know that some of the other strategies to encourage biking are, covered bike storage, showers, things like that. Is that assumed, or is it worth?
No, we can put it in there.
Well, so I guess two things on that before we get too detailed. One, that is part of the transportation demand management stuff. And two, I think CATMA, they've got a whole mission statement of all the different tools in the toolbox. And I wouldn't want to sort of imply that we're only supporting some of those, because their entire mission is this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, including the financial incentives. Like if an employer is part of CATMA, you can participate in raffles and get rewarded for biking. So Paul's right.
Well,
CATMA
right,
is a
and they have
whole
things
suite
like
of
the
measures.
Guaranteed Ride Home, which is a really
Yep.
neat program. It's basically addressing the psychological fear of not taking your car, which is that if something goes wrong and you miss your bus, they will
Yeah.
pay for you to take a cab home. And it's
Yay.
almost nobody uses it, but it has a huge impact on the psychological barrier of, oh my God, what if my boss keeps me late half an hour and I miss the last bus home? And it's amazing how well that piece of it has worked.
Great.
Okay, so we'll do a little bit more work on this. And maybe the work on this is just more in the narrative about what CATMA does to capture the fact that, financial rewards and the ride home is part of the whole TDM strategy. Okay, going on to the next one. Survey residents on approaches for encouraging bus ridership. Approaches could include advocating for free ridership.
Melanie, before you go down this list, I'm pretty sure that the task force has covered all of these.
Oh,
They were just reorganized in this new
Okay.
layout. I think we checked this last week. I'm pretty sure that task force has been through all these.
Yes, we have been through this.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate.
Except the brown part at the very bottom.
Oh, the brown part at the very bottom.
Wasn't that what we were talking about earlier?
Yeah,
Right, so that's that
kind of the pathway, right?
conversation about the cafe standards and fuel economy being improved in vehicles into the future, and that the city may not have much influence
We
over
expanded
that.
the pathway, right? And so we're going to mention efficiency in one a little bit.
Yeah, we incorporated the,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is not needed. There's a delete.
oh, that's right.
That felt good, didn't it?
Yeah.
So,
I want to point out, now that we're at the end of the list, that, in looking at the Montgomery County example and starting to think about how we would take the work that we've done and put it in that format, I did notice we have a lot more actions than Montgomery County did. So for example, for buildings and thermal, Montgomery County had 7 actions and we currently have 43. So I have not counted up transportation, but I'm glad it's turning out to be not quite as large of a list. I think when we get all of our action items together, we may want to go back and think about items that need to be merged or taken out because they're not as practical as others. Thinking back to the very beginning of this process, when it was really the task force's strong feeling that we wanted this to be a usable document that people in the community could understand and use. And my fear is that if we have 100 actions, it will not be a usable, readable document, and it will also, be hard for the city to implement. So,
Well, I think
to
part
bring
of,
that,
I understand what you're saying, and part of that was because of the structure of the spreadsheet that caused it to be so many, because, when Srini and I were sort of working on this kind of format, we had very few, and this was kind of the way Montgomery County had done it. So just by changing it to a spreadsheet, we've added a lot of measures, which were really just because some were policies, some were promotion, and some were investments. So I don't think we actually have more categories. We just are showing it. We're showing it differently.
there's also some redundancy, I think, similar to what you're saying, Donna, where
Right.
like the tax breaks or incentives are now showing up because we've created sections for multifamily, single family, commercial.
Right.
A lot of the same things are showing up in multiple places.
Right.
So, and I still take your point. I think it's absolutely right that we need to do everything we can to have at least the sort of high level view, a digestible number of measures. And then potentially there's a place where, as you drill down, it expands and says, well, in order to accomplish this topic, there's
Right.
a few particular strategies that we're going to have to employ to get it done, but that people can sort of look at it and see, okay, these are the big chunks in there. So I think that's maybe
And
something.
we have to trust that the implementation plan is going to detail some of these things that we're actually trying to do almost. I mean, we're getting close
Right.
to implementation and I think the implementation plan is going to take up this stuff and then make it.
Yeah, but I do think that if you kind of look at, if you recombine policy, promotion, investments, you'll find that those kind of relate back to one action.
Can I squeeze in a couple of things here from the public? So one is there's so I still want to get to Chris to get his comment in there, and Nick had a couple other comments. I don't know if we wanted to review. That might be some small changes that we can capture if people feel like they're appropriate. One is a comment about T 2.4 specifically addressing snow removal, snow management for bike ped. And again, maybe that becomes part of implementation or some other way of capturing it. But if folks feel like that's in the intent, just note that.
I think it's in the intent.
Okay.
But, you know, but
So-
Nick does bike commute year round, so he definitely sees it.
Yeah, no, I've certainly experienced the Burlington bike path is left for skiing in the wintertime, and it makes it very exciting if you're on wheels. So maybe that's an implementation plan detail. Nick, I think the question about 2.2 being weaker than you'd like to see regarding working with waste haulers, I think got some discussion last time, and I think there's some limitations, if I remember that conversation, about how much the city could do to tell those private businesses. Maybe that's not true. Maybe there are regulations and that could be
Well,
strong. I don't remember.
I think the words, because if we just put in that we're trying to reduce mileage, you know, and that part was taken out. We're not just trying to reduce the duplication. We're trying to reduce the number of miles they drive.
I suspect if I can read into Nick's comment, what it currently says is work with them to reduce service duplication.
Oh, yeah.
And if I follow that through, it's like we sit down and they say, no, we like what we're doing now. Well, we cross that off the list and we didn't do any more. The other way of saying it is, you know, cause them to not have so many miles and come up with a plan and enforce it. And it's not a request, it's a rule. I don't know if that's within our power or not, but that would be the stronger phrasing on it is cut duplicate miles.
You might be able to get somewhere in between those by phrasing it the way that you phrased other things, which is that the action is to reduce, it's not to work with to, it is to reduce duplication of services.
Right.
You know, and hopefully that's working with them. And if it's not, then it's, you know, it's yeah.
Well, and I would say it's, we don't actually care whether the service is duplicated or not. We care that the miles are reduced. I mean, there are interests in keeping the services from being duplicated in the sense that we want fewer trucks rolling down the streets if we live on those streets and don't like the noise and whatnot of the trucks. But if the climate action plan's goal is to reduce miles, then we should just say that we want to reduce garbage hauling miles. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
And under solid waste, there's the additional issue of, you know, how many times do you really need pickups, you know, a month? You know, it's like if you reduce the number of pickups to every other week, then perhaps people start understanding how to reduce their trash generation, you know. It kind of goes both ways. You know, you're making it very possible for people to throw away lots and lots of stuff because you have these huge bins and they get picked up every week.
So these seem like implementation issues that we can capture there, but that maybe is a recommendation that Melanie and Ann, you can tighten that up a little bit if that seems appropriate.
Yeah, I've been taking notes.
Great, thank you. So if everyone is at a good place with this section, I do want to give Chris Trombley a chance to make his comment. If you're still with us, Chris.
Yeah, I was doing some other stuff. Hi, Darylyn. I'm not here to replace anything Darylyn's hard work is doing, and we're very appreciative of her work on behalf of the Affordable Housing Committee. So I've been meaning to attend one of these meetings for a while, and calendars finally lined up. Just quick back on B 2.7, just on the. I realize you already voted on it, but how do we review these from an equity perspective? If we're offering tax incentives for residents, first thought come to mind that, you know, who's able to take advantages of those discounts? Would it be generally higher income households and, you know, households that maybe can't afford and they don't qualify for subsidies from existing programs? Maybe they don't see that benefit. And then the tax burden is distributed to the rest of the city. Just a quick thought on that. In general, on the vehicle miles traveled, I just wasn't sure how they were calculated. You know, I was hearing the conversation about folks from 40 miles away. It's like you could hear me talking. My father drives in from Lincoln to South Burlington every day.
Wow.
That's a haul. My brother lives in Ferrisburg and drives into South Burlington every day, and that's a haul. So I just when we talk about vehicle miles traveled, is that only to South Burlington residents, or policies that you might be able to capture benefit for some of those folks that live in that 80% of the workers or whatever. On T 2.2, the consolidated trash service, it would be excellent if maybe one of the action recommendations might be a consolidation of trash service altogether. On my street, I have 5 different trash haulers, that come during the week. And it's completely redundant. One person's got one hauler, and so reduction of miles traveled there. And it seems like maybe that would align with kind of the goal that you're asking for. T 2.9, I actually kind of really liked the item that was added. I wouldn't want to see it removed as is. The LDRs were updated to contain development, and there could be a conversation about density of the housing that would happen there. It doesn't have to be higher, but there are job centers that would benefit. Say for example, if Beta came to town, they're bringing more workers with them. That's are we pushing residents further away if we can't accommodate the housing that we would need in the transit overlay and city center where that targeted development should go? And then just I really loved Paul's statement. I just want to emphasize the discussion on T210 and T215. That really has higher benefits to lower income households, not only to reduce mileage. Bus service is woefully inadequate for Chittenden County, and sometimes you just got to get to the bus first, and you want to be safe getting to the bus, and that reliance on the car to first I got to go to this place, and then I got to go to this place. The bus service doesn't necessarily provide that, and really expanding the transportate or the bike ped funding, I see as like one of the highest priorities on this list. I mean, that's actually getting people out of their cars, and you don't have to spend the cost of upgrading from a gas to an electric. It's you're just it's fewer miles. So I think it's I do have to drop off now, but thank you so much for hosting this conversation, and you're doing great work. And if it's easier, I put this in writing, I can do that, or I just wanted to get that in before you close out that conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. And I know Paul had his hand up, and Chris, I didn't know if maybe he's dropped already.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that to one of Chris's questions about the vehicle miles traveled, as I understand it, the measurement metric that we're using is vehicles registered in South Burlington, so South Burlington residents, which is good because each community can then think about it. But I think we all need to challenge ourselves to recognize that South Burlington is an employment hub, and we draw people, as Chris was just describing, from a lot of places. And so some of our strategies, will need to sort of acknowledge that. And how do we help people have alternatives than driving that far, whether it's living closer or having micro transit within the city so that somebody gets to their first destination, or car park and rides, that kinds of things that sort of accommodate the known fact of South Burlington.
Thanks, Paul.
Didn't we at one time have something about parking in areas closer to the interstate that would allow connection to transit? Did that disappear?
That's there. That's T.1 or T.2.16, the last one.
Oh, okay. There it is.
Great.
Thank you.
So can I suggest, Ethan, that maybe this would be a good point to have Melanie and Ann work on this, and then if folks are feeling like this is in pretty good shape, maybe your next meeting, you could similarly sign off on these.
Yeah.
And then can I suggest, as we go forward to the next part of the work plan, the next meeting is going to be mostly about the check-in on the science-based targets, and maybe if you'd all be willing, similar to what you've just done with transportation, we could have Melanie and Ann put together a first cut of all the other sectors combined, and have you provide your first round of individual feedback to in advance of that May meeting to get those going. What do folks feel like that could be done, to just put all the rest of them together?
Yep.
Makes sense.
Could I ask a question about that? If we go back to the original document where you laid out the pathways and the actions, remember? When we got to government ops, there was only one action, and it was about government vehicles, like the city where they mow the lawns and leaf and all of those. That was it. And that
I think there will be more. That was,
okay, 'cause I was
kind of
gonna
a
say,
first cut,
otherwise-
and we hit the high priority sectors.
Oh, okay, because
Right,
that probably doesn't even belong
Right,
there.
Darylyn, some of them were in transportation, and we agreed last time they should move. And then I think I'd like to, have an internal discussion about how do I maybe take a first pass at getting our department's feedback about what they see as some of the best ideas. We are scheduled in 4 years' time to do a generational upgrade to the Bartlett Bay wastewater treatment facility. Good news, energy efficiency is already plugged into doing that, but that's going to be that's our number one energy emission is running wastewater treatment facilities. So
Yeah.
setting that as whenever we get to the generational updates of those things every 20 years to get them the most efficient they can possibly be within the technology that exists, et cetera, et cetera.
Great.
I had a question. This is maybe a little late to be asking this, but the agenda has an item to vote on the minutes from the last two meetings, and an asterisk says it has attachments, and
The second asterisk is that there were no attachments.
I should have read between the lines.
I'm a little behind on that, Ethan. I apologize. I'll get them to you for the next one.
It's okay. I wasn't trying to give you a hard time. I just wanted to find out whether that was on our list or not. So, okay. One fewer thing that we're not getting to, or that we're not getting to.
Yeah.
Any other?
Yeah, I'm just looking at item 2.15. And I think we need to put more emphasis on for bike commuters. Because this almost sounds, connect all neighborhoods in South Burlington and to adjacent communities. We need to emphasize that a good piece of this is to improve the infrastructure for bike commuting specifically. Because it doesn't really say that here.
So would that go back to what we discussed earlier in terms of developing a walk bike plan?
It does actually, yeah.
Master plan, yep.
Yeah, because
Okay.
then you'd have to identify where are the places where everybody comes, where they're coming from and where they're going to, and addressing that. And Local Motion has started that work, and the Vermont Agency of Transportation as well.
Right. Well, as has the city with the penny for paths major investment that the voters have agreed to, right? So.
Oh, absolutely. It's not as, we're basically looking at filling the gaps right now. And, we haven't really been looking so much at where is everybody heading to? We're just trying to make it so that there aren't as many gaps in the system.
So Donna, I'm wondering, I think it's a good point to really think about it in terms of bike commuting. And I know the rec path in Burlington is is great, but it's also not really a commuter friendly place in the summertime as people stroll along hand in hand as you're trying to get to work late. And so it is a different framing. And I think people don't often necessarily think about that. And I wonder if, harkening back to Paul's comment about how setting this very concrete 10% VMT reduction, that type of goal that then we hand off to a more detailed process like, the planning board, if we're also setting this master plan process and saying like, okay, go figure out all the details of what is bike lanes and what is intersections and what is, what are all the things we do we need to sort of articulate here, to your point, Donna, that some kind of vision about, bikes being a viable form of transportation or X% of commutes happening on bikes, or like, how do we articulate that so that when the master plan is being made, someone could say, did this accomplish what we wanted, or did we just put window dressing on?
Yeah, I mean, that is really the point of the master plan. It's basically as a transportation, not just recreation, but as a mode of transportation.
Right. Well, and I would just note that in this one, we're under the category strategic investment. And so the key thing here is invest in doing these things.
Right.
In addition to developing the policy for them. So whether that needs to elaborate a little bit or be said a little bit differently to talk about increase. I like the idea of commuters being said, or for transportation purposes, because it might just be going to the store to get milk. Whatever it is, it's not just a recreational purpose.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's possible to articulate something about X% of trips have a viable safe bike route or something like that. Some way of sort of testing like how far are we along the path, and put that metric in terms of like, here's where people live and here's where they have to go, and can they get from here to there without like, I look at some of the trips that I want to take in South Burlington. I'm like, sure, I can get there. I just go in the opposite direction and then like up through the woods, and then I cut back over, get onto the highway, and like it's three times as many miles on a bike.
Right. The objective, possible. Ethan, in my view, should be 100.
100%
of the percent of routes that feel safe to do in other than the interstate, which we probably can't control.
Right. Sure.
And generally wanting to stay off of Williston Road and except for the part where there's a lane.
Or
Shelburne Road.
Williston Road.
Not to have a debate about this at 9:15, Donna, but I would like to, I would argue for a vision where you don't have to be off Williston Road.
Yeah.
It might be it might be 25 years from now to get there, but
it's probably beyond my capability of thinking that far out at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah. But I mean, we are doing a project, for example, to put a rec path along a portion of Williston Road, and that's going to be a decade-long project to do that. And, right in front of Al's French Fries, it's a big, big, big project, but it takes somebody saying today that it's important to do to get it done. So that's why, I mean, we shouldn't self-limit.
Yeah, Shelburne Road, Williston Road, Dorset Street could all be bike friendly.
It could be.
Okay. If no one else has anything urgent, thank you all for staying past 9 o'clock in order to get through this process. This is great to have reached another. I know it's not completed, but we did make it through this section, and look forward to seeing it all cleaned up. And thanks, Ann and Melanie, for all the work you do outside of these meetings to make it possible for us to have these arguments with content in front of us. So good progress, and hopefully we can stay on the new schedule. So Melanie, you'll circulate something to let people sign up for groups to work on those. I know we said we did that during the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we did do that Sign Up Genius early on. I can resend out that link.
Can you do that and open up take the caps off, and then we'll.
I thought what we were going to do is we were just going to try and bang it all out the next section. We were going to comment on the actions in the meantime.
Yeah, I think, but yeah, before the next meeting, I don't think we have subgroups.
Right. I think what's worked really well with these two, if I can, is the group sort of gives some broad and then some broad feedback. And then if it makes sense to have a subgroup work through some detail, but it seems like you've finally gotten your steam doing it this way. So
Yeah,
It seems like,
I think this was a very productive meeting.
yeah,
Okay, so we're pausing on the subgroups until further notice, maybe.
unless we need it. Yeah, unless
If we need it. Okay, I'm fine with that.
All right, if everyone's good with that.
night, everyone.
Fantastic. Good
Right.
night, all.
You want a motion to adjourn?
Nope, I'm just going to hit the end button.
Hey, thanks.
Adjourned.
Good night.
Bye.